Welcome to the new Missile Age series. Somewhere right now, a military officer is looking at a screen that's telling them, with total confidence, that an attack is inbound. They have less time to check if it's real than it takes to read this sentence. And the system giving them that confidence has never been tested in an actual war. That's not a hypothetical. That's the world New Start's expiration just left us in. I'm Dr. Naim Tahir Baig, and this is Strategic Affairs. Over the past few days, I published a 4-part series here and on Substack, breaking down a new theoretical framework I call machine speed crisis instability. How AI decision support can make nuclear war more likely without a single missile becoming more dangerous. If you watched all 4 parts already, thank you. This is the full argument, cut together in one sitting, so you can follow the whole case from start to finish without the gaps between episodes. If you're new here, this is everything. The mechanism, the math, the real crisis that already tested it, and what it means for all 9 nuclear powers on Earth. Let's get into it. On February 5th, 2026, New START expired with no successor, leaving the US and Russia without a single binding limit on strategic arsenals for the first time since 1972. Most coverage of that moment focused on numbers. How many warheads, how many delivery systems? That's the wrong ledger. The more dangerous number isn't how many weapons exist. It's how many seconds a human has to decide whether to use one. What I want to walk you through today doesn't require any machine to decide anything, and doesn't require a single treaty violation, and yet it quietly moves the threshold at which a head of state chooses to strike first. To be clear at the outset, no nuclear-armed state has handed the decision to launch to an algorithm. Every declared nuclear power has publicly reaffirmed that a human makes the call. This isn't a story about a rogue AI. It's a story about what happens to human judgment when the clock is compressed, and the system in front of you seems to know more than you do. Start with how a leader has always thought about striking first. Thomas Schelling called it the reciprocal fear of surprise attack. A state doesn't strike first because it's aggressive. It strikes first because it fears being struck first, and believes waiting is more dangerous than acting. Restraint wins as long as there's time to watch, verify, and respond if something real happens. Instability creeps in the moment a leader believes that watching is a luxury they can't afford, usually because their forces or their command systems look vulnerable to being wiped out in one blow. For 60 years, that vulnerability has been mostly physical. How exposed are your missiles? How hardened are your command bunkers? How fast can the other side plausibly disarm you? Arms control treaties, basing decisions, and second strike capability were all built around managing that physical vulnerability. Here's the extension. AI decision support doesn't need to touch a missile to change this calculus. It changes it by doing 2 things at once, neither of which requires malice or malfunction. First, it compresses the time a leader believes they have to think. Faster sensors and faster data fusion mean a threat reaches a decision maker's desk faster than it used to. But there's a subtler effect. Even when the actual time available hasn't shrunk that much, a continuously updating AI dashboard creates a felt pressure to decide before the picture goes stale. The system doesn't need to be wrong. It just needs to feel urgent. Second, it erodes independent judgment within whatever time remains. This is a well-documented human tendency called automation bias. The more a person defers to a system's read of a situation instead of forming their own, the less benefit they get from any extra time they do have. Give a decision maker 10 more minutes, but let them spend those minutes trusting the machine's threat assessment instead of interrogating it, and the extra time buys almost nothing. Put those 2 effects together and you get something worth naming precisely. The threshold of suspicion at which a leader decides preemption is worth it goes down, even though nothing about the physical vulnerability of anyone's forces has changed. The danger isn't manufactured by a weapon becoming more exposed. It's manufactured informationally inside the decision maker's head by how fast and how confidently the system in front of them says this looks real. The unsettling part isn't that a leader might trust a flawed AI system. It's that this works even when a state's own human control is genuinely solid. If a country reasonably believes its rival's decision-making has gotten faster and more automated, it has to raise its own alertness in response, because a twitchier adversary is a more dangerous adversary, whether or not that adversary is actually as twitchy as feared. Each side's uncertainty about the other side's automation becomes a reason to tighten its own trigger finger. That's the informal version of the argument. Now let's make it precise enough to actually test. There's a number that decides whether a nuclear crisis stays a crisis or becomes something worse. It's not the number of warheads. It's a threshold, a point where a leader stops watching and starts striking. For 60 years, that threshold moved for one reason. Now I want to show you the second reason and the actual equation behind it. Picture a decision maker weighing two options: strike first or wait and see. A few things matter to that choice. How likely do they think it is that the other side is actually launching an attack right now? Call that P. How bad is it if they wait and get hit? Call that L for loss. How bad is it if they strike first and it turns out there was no attack at all? A catastrophic false alarm, call that C. And how much time do they have to figure out which one they're actually looking at? Call that tau, the Greek letter that shows up everywhere in this field to mean time available. The logic here is simple, even if the notation looks means intimidating. Waiting is risky because you might get caught by something real. Striking is risky because you might be wrong. Somewhere in between there's a threshold, a probability of attack, call it P star, above which striking first starts to look like the safer bet. Here's the formula. P star equals C divided by C plus the quantity 1 minus Q of tau times L. Q of tau is the odds that given tau amount of time, the decision maker correctly figures out whether an attack is real. More time generally means better odds. As tau grows, Q climbs toward 1, meaning given enough time you can basically always tell a real attack from a false alarm. And when that happens, P star climbs toward 1. In plain English, with enough time to think, a leader will only strike when they're almost completely certain. That's what a stable world looks like. Now shrink tau. Less time means worse judgment. Q falls. And when Q falls, P star falls too, a lower threshold. The leader will strike on weaker evidence. And notice, nothing about anyone's missiles changed, only the clock did. That's the effect of time alone. But there's a second dial specific to AI. Call it beta, a number between 0 and 1 that captures how much a decision maker defers to a machine's assessment instead of their own judgment. At beta equals 0, they use all their time to think for themselves. At beta equals 1, they've essentially outsourced the judgment entirely, and extra time buys them nothing because they're not using it. The more a leader defers to the machine, the weaker the evidence needed to trigger a strike. Same direction as time compression. And these two effects don't just add together, they compound. An organization that already leans heavily on automation gets hit harder by a given amount of time pressure than one that doesn't. Here's the part I find most interesting, and it's a little counterintuitive. Everything so far is one decision maker reasoning alone. Real crises involve two sides. You'd hope that adding a second player might dilute the danger. It doesn't. If anything, it sharpens it. A stable outcome needs both sides to believe the other's true attack probability sits below its own threshold. But if side A comes to believe that side B is operating under heavy time pressure, with a lot of automated decision making, meaning B's threshold is low, then A has to revise its own estimate of is B about to strike me upward. That pushes A closer to A's own threshold. B's compressed judgment becomes A's reason to abandon patience, and it runs both directions at once. I call this a reciprocal automation spiral. Each side, believing the other is speeding up, has an incentive to speed up its own response, just to avoid being outpaced. Both thresholds ratchet downward together. It's the crisis stability version of an arms race. Except the currency here isn't warhead counts, it's reaction time. So, two variables. How much time a decision maker believes they have, and how much they trust the machine over themselves, move the threshold for nuclear first use, independent of anything about the weapons themselves. And in a two-sided crisis, this doesn't cancel out, it compounds. Now let's leave the algebra behind and walk through the clearest real-world instance of this mechanism firing outside of a wargame. Most theories about nuclear crisis stability are tested against hypotheticals, wargames, tabletop exercises, thought experiments. This one has a real case. May 2025, India and Pakistan. 72 hours that came closer to the mechanism I've just described than anyone would like. A note on where this comes from. Everything here is built from open source reporting and public strategic analysis. The Belfer Center, War on the Rocks, RUSI, and the SIPRI Yearbook 2025. Nothing claims access to classified material. But when multiple independent, credible sources converge on describing the same dynamic, that convergence is exactly the kind of corroboration a theory needs before you trust it. Here's what happened. On April 22, 2025, terrorists attacked civilians in Pahalgam, in Indian-administered Kashmir, killing 26 people. India responded on May 7th with missile and airstrikes, an operation India called Operation Sindhu. Pakistan answered with its own operation, Banyan Marsus. What followed was the most serious exchange between the two countries in decades. It was contained barely by a ceasefire brokered by the United States on May 10th. Strip away the politics for a second and look at the structural conditions these two countries were operating under, because they are precisely the conditions that mechanism flags as highest risk. First, a shortest dyad. Flight times between India and Pakistan are measured in minutes. There's very little natural deliberation time built into the geography itself. Second, high entanglement. Delivery systems used by both sides carry payloads, conventional or nuclear, that can't always be told apart mid-flight. Third, doctrinal asymmetry. India maintains a declared no first use policy. Pakistan maintains what's called full spectrum deterrence, a doctrine that reserves the option of early, battlefield level nuclear use. Two countries playing, in a real sense, by different rule books. The crisis wasn't fought only with missiles and drones. Alongside the actual exchange, Pakistani-linked actors ran a large-scale disinformation campaign, fabricated claims of downed aircraft, doctored videos, false casualty numbers. By independent accounts, this repeatedly caught Indian authorities flat-footed in the information space. In the language of the model I just walked through, this is a direct hit on Q, the ability to correctly tell a real threat from a false one. Degrade Q, and the effective time available to think shrinks, even if the clock on the wall doesn't move at all. India struck targets at or near presumed nuclear-related infrastructure, reportedly including Kirana Hills and Noor Khan Air Base. Strikes this close to nuclear-associated sites between two nuclear-armed states were by most independent assessments unprecedented. Because the targeted assets were entangled with nuclear roles, a strike intended as a purely conventional response couldn't be confidently read that way from the other side. Here's what elevates this from a crisis that was scary to a case that actually supports the theory. Matt Koda, a senior analyst at CIPRA and the Federation of American Scientists, concluded independently that the combination of strikes on nuclear-related military infrastructure plus third-party disinformation risked turning a conventional conflict into a nuclear one. That's a professional arms control analyst reasoning from open sources, arriving at a characterization that lines up almost exactly with the mechanism built from first principles. Nuclear war did not occur. The crisis was contained within 4 days. This isn't a weakness in the argument, it's exactly consistent with what the theory claims. The mechanism raises risk. It doesn't make catastrophe inevitable in any single crisis. But contained is not the same as safe. The safety margin narrowed in exactly the way the model predicts. And the next crisis, with slightly worse luck or slightly faster automation on either side, may not resolve the same way. Now let's zoom out, from one dyad to all 9 nuclear-armed states. Every nuclear-armed state on Earth says the same thing. A human is always in control of the decision to use nuclear weapons. That claim is doing a lot of work. And it isn't equally true or equally verifiable everywhere. A quick method note, what follows is a structured open source synthesis, not a classified assessment. It's built from declared national policy and public analysis, coded against 2 dimensions, treated as a hypothesis about where this mechanism is most likely to bite, not a settled scorecard. 2 structural features determine how exposed a state is to machine speed crisis instability. The first is entanglement, how physically and informationally commingled a state's conventional and nuclear command systems are. The second is structural tau, how much deliberation time a state's declared posture builds in by default. 2 patterns stand out. First, the states at greatest risk combine high entanglement with structurally short deliberation time. Pakistan and North Korea sit here most acutely, and the India-Pakistan dyad we just walked through is the likeliest theater for this mechanism to actually fire. Second, the dedicated low entanglement postures of the United Kingdom and France largely insulate them from this mechanism. That tells us the danger isn't AI decision support as such. It's the combination of AI speed with entanglement and short deliberation time. Let me be precise about the two riskiest cases, rather than treating this coding as fixed. Pakistan's coding would move toward lower risk if it maintains genuine separation of warheads from short range delivery systems during a crisis, effectively buying back deliberation time. It would move toward higher risk if those systems are kept mated and pre authorized. The open record doesn't settle this either way. North Korea is coded highest risk because a small, vulnerable arsenal creates severe use it or lose it pressure. Counterintuitively, this would actually improve if North Korea achieved a secure second strike capability, since a more survivable arsenal removes the pressure to use it before losing it. Zoom out further and the backdrop matters too. The world is genuinely tripolar at the great power level now. China's arsenal grew from roughly 500 warheads in early 2024 to around 600 by January 2025, with US defense planners projecting more than 1,000 by 2030. I want to confront directly whether that build-up undercuts everything I've argued. It doesn't, for three reasons. A bigger arsenal doesn't disprove AI-driven crisis instability, it just confirms arms racing is also real. The build-up's most dangerous effect is itself a crisis stability effect. A larger, faster reacting Chinese force makes its adversaries more alert in turn through the same reciprocal automation spiral, just at the level of a rising great power instead of a regional dyad. And because crisis instability at the margin of use is the dominant risk, confidence building and decision time measures matter more than warhead caps. Three concrete lines of effort are realistic even with formal arms control currently lapsed. 1. Restore deliberation time and protect discrimination with human review that's substantive, not nominal. 2. Build confidence at the human-machine interface, specifically harden crisis communication and stress testing AI-enabled command systems before they're fielded. 3. Rebuild dialogue in stages rather than one grand bargain, since a full trilateral agreement isn't realistic right now. So here's the through line across everything I've walked through today. The number that determines whether the next nuclear crisis stays contained isn't how many weapons exist. It's how much time decision makers believe they have, and how much they trust the machine over their own judgment when that time runs out. Transparency about human control, restored deliberation time, and honest confidence building at the human-machine interface are tools available right now. No new treaty required. No arsenal reduction needed to start. Thanks for watching this through to the end. If it was useful, the best thing you can do is send it to one person who still thinks this is a story about warhead counts.